Okay, so yes, the work in workshop is me. I am doing the work. You don't have to do anything. As Loa mentioned, the difference between this and what you might call a normal lecture is it's okay for people to kind of chime in and ask questions. That's with the exception of Nick. So, you know, what I'm going to do today, it's a kind of two-part thing, really. First of all, I want to offer a primer into what emblem glyphs are, the history of discovery, what we know about them right now. And then I'm going to sort of segue into more recent research about a very particular issue, which is the moving emblem glyph, the ways in which emblem glyphs can transfer across the landscape, and the way that presents some very interesting problems. Okay, so without further ado, I think I'm finishing until going until 3. Is that right? I don't have a program. Okay, so what we might do is, if people really want to take a break, we can break halfway through. But if people want to get up and just go to the bathroom in the meantime, it's relaxed. We don't have to stand on special permission. Okay, so inside emblem glyphs is the title, and I think can we kill some of these lights? It's just a little bit bright on the screen. Well, I think we might be able to still keep some in the audience. It's just getting a bit more, because these are supposed to be very big. Is that better? Yeah. Okay, good. So, well, everyone here knows this kind of stuff. We've got a big landscape of major cities, and I could carry on adding more and more of those things until there was hundreds. But this, of course, is the kind of archaeological ruins that were being encountered in the 19th century into the 20th century. And as we'll see when we come to people like Ivan Spreit, perhaps some of you won't know his name, but he's doing kind of a leading-edge exploration in some very sort of terra incognita kind of areas of Campeche and Quintana Roo. These sites are still being discovered, really nice, big ruins. And the perennial question when you look at a landscape like this anywhere in the world is how are they organized? How is power distributed? This is a kind of essential question about social structure. So many of you will know the kind of backstory that, you know, back in the sort of early part of the 20th century, we had the theocratic Maya, we had the peaceful Maya, and we had the apolitical Maya. They really didn't care about politics in the traditional, or at least prevailing idea of that time. And there wasn't really any way of breaking through with a limited understanding of hieroglyphs to work out what might be in the glyphs talking about politics. Until Heinrich Berlin, German emigre to Mexico, worked in collaboration. Well, he worked on his own, but he was in correspondence with people like Proskuriakov and also with Thompson. So he wasn't really a lone wolf. He was working with other people as well. And the kinds of patterns that he was identifying was the repetition of these single signs at certain sites. So here we have what would soon emerge by 1960 in the work of Tatiana Proskuriakov as rulers 1, 2, or 3, and they have this repetitive formula in their name phrases. And writing in just a little bit earlier than that, in 1958, he published 8 emblem glyphs that he had identified. What he means by that is that when you look at the inscriptions of a particular site, one of these predominates. After, you know, a royal dedication phrase, a calendrical ceremony, sometimes 8, 10 times on the same monument, you'll find one of these things, and he called them emblem glyphs. Now, he didn't actually know what they meant, and he speculated that they could be the name of the city, they could be the name of a dynasty ruling that city, or they might relate to some patron deity. And so he, quite rightly, really, didn't have any other further data to base this on, and he just sort of left that out there. But he gave them this very, very, sticking in our mind title of the emblem glyph. Okay. One of the things you won't see there, of course, is the emblem glyph of the snake, which is going to be one of our main topics in just a few minutes. And the reason for that is that he wasn't able to associate it with one of Maya sites. He said it literally, it's a place of which I do not know the location. Okay, so Berlin published this in 1958, and by the 1960s, people were obviously trying to use that information and look at it in a social and political way. Berlin had noted that there's a phrase here, this is, of course, Korpanstil A, erected roughly in 731. It's Washaklahunu Bak Awil, we heard quite a bit about in Wendy's talk last night. But there's a section here where there's not one, but 4 emblem glyphs. So, and those are, up here, Kopan, Tikal, at the time, the unknown snakehead emblem glyph, and Palenque. So this was a distribution of 4 emblem glyphs, and seemed to be very significant. The thing that isn't included here is that they have a sort of matching set of directions, world directions, west, east, north, south. And they seem to be lining up with these emblems to almost indicate that each one belongs in a different quadrant. Now, geographically, it doesn't really work. It turns out, I think, Calakmul, which is the most northerly, is something like the south or east or something. So there isn't a direct correspondence between those directions and the physical locations of these places. But nonetheless, there does seem to be a relationship. Okay. Now, Thomas Bartel, he wrote 2 articles, both published in 1968. One was published in Spanish, another one in German. The Spanish one tends to have been read by a lot of Maya scholars. The German one is less well known. It's actually more interesting in some ways. He's very acerbic about Thomson and Morley and criticizes the whole theocratic model and, in quite interesting ways. But he was looking at that set of 4 emblems and this potential that there may be a division of the Maya world into 4 quadrants, a cosmological model. And the other piece of evidence he had for that, there was a couple of other things, but the most important thing was Sebal Stela 10. And down here, there's another collection of 4 emblems. They occur here, here, and here, and if we just show what they are Sebal, this sign only found at Sebal, Tikal, the snake head again, he was calling it Chan for snake, and this one which we now know is Matul de San Jose. Now, what you notice here is that the Tikal and the snakehead are the same, but Sebal and Matul de San Jose are new, and Palenque and Copan have disappeared. If we imagine that there's some relationship between these 2 sets. And what Bartel speculated was this was, considering that it's much later, if we go back, we can see that this is 849 rather than 731, that there's a contraction of the Maya realm. That back in the late Classic, there are 4 major centers, and they have carved up the Maya world between them. When it came to 849, we're in the beginnings or in the midst of the collapse process. Things have changed. And now, well, you have these central cities like Tikal and Calakmul. Well, they're still going. But places like Palenque and Copan have dropped out. And in fact, there are no inscriptions from this period at either Palenque or Copan. So that was not an unreasonable assumption. And for him, the collapse happened on the periphery and then progressed to the center, and the center was the last place to disappear, which to some extent is true. Okay. So this led to the model of the 4 capitals, and Bartel published this in 1968, and it was the best attempt that we had to try and understand the Maya political world. But obviously this leads, a tremendous amount of questions. We have many more emblem glyphs, we have many more cities. How does everyone else fit together with that? And that was the question taken up by Joyce Marcus. And she wanted to understand how all these other emblems fitted together with these 4 big ones. And she started to introduce archaeological data, survey data, and to use some ideas, one of which have been particularly popularized by her husband, Ken Flannery, imported from work in Mesopotamia, and originally actually an economic model from Europe, central place theory. And this essentially says that you get a powerful center, and around it you'll get smaller ones. And then to each of those smaller ones will then be smaller ones attached to those, and then smaller ones attached to those. And this kind of hexagonal structure, usually with 6 things around things, is indicative of political integration. It's effectively an ancient Maya state. Later on became called an archaic state. So she, using pieces of epigraphic information, but also archaeological information, she took Tikal, Copan, Palenque. Of course, although she had herself guessed that the snake head was actually at Calakmul, because the inscriptions at Calakmul were so badly beaten up, as we'll see, she actually became interested in Yaxchilan as another one of these primary centers, and then organized potential secondary, tertiary, and so on levels beneath that. And what would happen is that the emblem of Tikal might be mentioned at these places, but they're talking about the main center. The main center never talks about the small centers. So it's a ranking based on number and nature of references to these major centers at these smaller centers, and to a large extent, especially at this level, it's a distribution based on site size. Okay. So this was kind of solidifying now. It's not just a cosmological model, it's actually a political model of a division of the Maya world into a very small number of giant states. And they have analogs around the world for early state formation, particularly, as I say, in Mesopotamia. Now, the other scholar interested in these questions was Richard Adams, and he's a very, very statistically minded archaeologist. And he wanted to really deepen this model and deepen this understanding. And he did a lot of survey work. It wasn't actually hugely based on his own surveys. It was more taking published data, Rupert and Denison's explorations, their descriptions of Maya sites, maps which were available and published, and he and some other colleagues synthesized this information. And they used different techniques. They estimated the volume of construction at Maya cities. They counted the number of plazas in the cities. And they created these rankings. And the rankings suggested that places like Tikal and Calakmul, which were self-evidently huge, were surrounded by sites which were plausibly in escalating or declining scale. And the net result of this was his suggestion of regional states. So he had more than 4 states, more than 5 states. It's really about whatever it is, 8 or so. Carving up the Maya world into these large, large blocks. Okay. So we're now, this particular version is from 1985, but we're talking about the work for the 1970s. So Bartle had been working in the 1960s, Marcus and Adams were working into the 70s, into the 80s, and into the 90s. So, up until now, no one has read a single emblem glyph. We had no idea what was actually going on inside those glyphs. They were simply being used as emblematic markers, of which all sorts of interpretations could be made. But clearly, as the decipherment was carrying on, the important thing was to be able to understand what they actually said. And the key work here was done by Floyd Lounsbury, who in 1973 published quite a long and quite dense article deciphering principally actually this sign up here, this is the full form, as the word Howl, Lord. And as you might have remembered, we'll see a lot more of it, this element in particular is a key part of emblem glyphs. Strangely enough, actually, Thompson, a long time ago, had speculated that that sign may relate to lordship, but never went so far as to link it to the word Howl. Now, a lot of Lounsbury's arguments were actually incorrect. It's one of these things where he had the essential correct solution, but a lot of the arguments now we would cast aside. They weren't really the important ways of getting to it. But he did get to it. We know that not only is this sign a Howl, but also it has these other versions. We have the young lord, the sort of hero twin, Hunahau, one lord, with the headband and the dot, these are kind of diagnostics of him, plus this particular kind of, it's actually related to seeds of all things, on his headband. A vulture who wears the same headband, so the headband is really the diagnostic there. And then this, as I say, this full form, this pretty abstracted form. All of them are a Howl. And as we understood more about emblem glyphs and the way that sometimes they're broken up into parts, in fact, emblem glyphs also employ these versions too. This is particularly where Peter Matthews comes in. We'll come to that in a second. Now, the other part of emblem glyphs, there's these sort of two blobs on top, which turn out to be a Howl, but also a very distinctive feature. Let's go back and have a look at them. You've got the blobs up here for a Howl, but you've also got what Thompson called the water group, these droplets, these little beads, and they are pretty much ever present in all these cases. So it's really this part and this part which are standard, and this part which changes. Yeah? So it's the variable thing which is what's identifying these particular sites, and it's these elements which tell you that they're part of a set. Okay, so that beady stuff also, of course, is another word. And the answer to that came from, actually it's another thing that came from Lander. Lander is famous for writing this treatise on ancient Maya, or the Maya of his time and the post-classic Maya life. And he did a small amount about hieroglyphs, including the Lander alphabet, which was absolutely crucial to kicking us off in terms of the decipherment. But he also had another page where he talks about Maya calendrics, and he shows images of the Maya months. And it took a long time, until Konorosov really came along, to work out what his spellings were doing. But in one case, he gave the month of Kumku, and he used a spelling, the glyphs attached to it as a kind of phonetic rendition, and it includes this sign here. And this gave the clue to Bill Ringel, who in 1988 published an interpretation of this glyph as ku, no H on it originally. This is the word for God, and it phonetically makes kumku. This is part of the decipherment. And it's, in various forms, it's the universal word for deity in Maya languages. So, and here you see another case of it. This is where it's used in Maya glyphs to talk about possession of particular deities by rulers. So we now have these two other parts. The two consistent, invariable parts turn out to be kuh, and actually, and we know now it's in an adjectival form, so it's kuhul for holy or sacred, and we have achau for Lord. So we actually can read two parts of the emblem glyph on every occasion. And I'll just show how that works. This is the example from Piedras Negras. The kuhul, the holy, appears here, the beaded sign. Next in the reading order comes, and we'll explain why, we get the name. This is the variable part. In the case of Piedras Negras, it's Yokib, which I actually don't think is deciphered. There's various ideas about what Yokib might mean, but we can't really say, I think, with any assurance what. But we know for sure that the polity, the kingdom of Piedras Negras was known as Yokib. And then finally, we have Achau, Lord. So the whole thing is Kuhul, Yokib, Achau. Okay, so why did that appear out of order? Because normally Maya writing should move from left to right and from top to bottom. But as you can see here, we were forced to go down here before we went back up there. And there's a reason for that. And it was a reason that was not discovered until relatively recently. I think it was not probably until something like the late 90s that David Stewart worked on the idea of superimposition. So we'll look at a superimposed emblem glyph. This is, I mean, it looks horribly complicated, but this is Tonina. So this is in Chiapas. This is the emblem glyph of Tonina. And I'm just going to pick it apart so you can see how it's made up. But first off, you can see that there's the beaded elements and this sign, which is part of it. You get all of that. We have our Howl, our two blobs. We have a bird's head, but it's a bird with a funny eye. And we have another sign over here. What's happening is that different glyphs are being combined. This is one of the things that makes Maya writing the most complicated writing system in the world. And it's essentially composed of these four elements. So the first one to be read, well, we have Kuk down here, and you can see that the order that these glyphs have combined is not actually in a reading order. You have to understand how the glyphs are combined. So the base level is the full form of Kuk. It's this sort of monkey head thing, the dotted thing, and this sign here. But it's overlaid with a Howl in its full form. That's what gets those blobs to the top of the sign. They're there because they're part of a bigger sign. So overlaying that, we get simply actually a phonetic reinforcement here, which is just the vowel O. Then we actually get the little sign in the eye is the meat of it. It's actually Po. With the O, you get Po with a glottal stop on the end. And as they kind of merge together, you can see what's happening. As they're all fusing, and what you end up with is that. Yeah? So that's why the Howl appears on the top. It's because it has a hidden full form beneath it. It's like a stack of pancakes. Yeah? But with some bits pointing out and other bits obscured. There isn't really any other writing system in the world that does that. The last part on here is wa. It's a phonetic complement, and it helps to tell you that a Howl is read last. A Howl, of course, ends in W. Wa is the phonetic complement. Okay, so back to our story. It turned out, of course, there's not just 4 emblem glyphs. There's not just 6 emblem glyphs, because we had Ceibal and Matul de San Jose. There's not just, well, a few more. There was Naranjo and a few other things. There's lots and lots and lots. And here, this is something we published in Chronicle of the Maya Kings and Queens, which I seem to remember there's 44. I can tell you quite safely that there's at least 98. And because of all the ones that we don't know or don't survive, we're probably talking 120, 150, more, maybe. So emblem glyphs are really quite common. And they belong to sites of hugely different size. Sometimes very big, sometimes very small. And here we see the ones like Calakmul, but places, including places we haven't yet identified. We don't know where Bitar is. Yeah? These kind of problems. And some of these sites are tiny. Some places have, like Pomona and Pipar seem to be the same place. There's all sorts of complexity. We know that later on that, where is it, Bonham Park, and Lakanha are kind of joined together. The kings of both places. And the same is true of Cancuen and of Machikila. So there's lots of these things, and we have to kind of understand how it works, that there's so many holy lords. And this is the kind of thing that Peter Matthews was working on in the 1980s. And there became a big split, because there were people who very much believed that there were huge regional states. But when Peter looked at these things, John Justison was working with him, there seemed to be just tons of these lords. And there wasn't a ranking between them. They didn't carry particularly different titles. They were all the same status. And if you follow that through, you end up with a totally different view. You have what was called peer polities or a mosaic, or any other way you can start to describe it, where instead of a few big kings and lots of other provinces, you have many, many completely independent kingdoms. And polities is a word that was introduced from work in, well, it's cross-cultural, but it especially came from archaic Greece. And the idea was that sometimes you get these very hierarchical landscapes, but other times you don't. You get kingdoms which are completely autonomous, and there are lots of them. They all share the same culture, but they're all kind of, they're sort of weak. They can't really expand. They have an ideology, they have a belief system which tells them that that's it. They can't really expand. I am the king of this place, and it finishes by the time you get over there. So it was a very particular interpretation of Maya society that led to this particular kind of view. And with all these emblem glyphs, it was possible to see completely new relationships between kingdoms. I mean, for example, in the regional state model, simply seeing an emblem glyph of one place at another was enough to say, oh, well, these people must be referencing, say, the Palenque emblem glyph at Tonina. Well, this shows that Tonina must be part of Palenque. It must be a secondary center within the Palenque state. But unfortunately, that's at a time when we couldn't read any glyphs. And when we can read them, it says, for example, that the king of Tonina has captured the king of Palenque. So it's a very, very different context. You have to understand the context before you can work out what's the purpose of these things. So Maya history, encoded in all sorts of ways, shows emblem glyphs, and it really helps us to pick apart the dynamics of society. Now, we're moving here towards a very practical idea about Maya emblem glyphs. But there is a symbolic dimension to it. And I particularly wanted to mention this find, of which is perhaps not as famous yet as it should be, although it's actually some years in the can now. This is the guy I mentioned, Ivan Sprite. He's Slovenian, and he's been doing absolutely sterling work, exploring the most inaccessible, remote, unvisited areas. We used to think that places like Campeche were understood, but because of his work, we know it's not. And he's now moving north of the Chetumal-Skarska Road. He's moving into Quintana Roo, and he's going to be finding more and more sites, because some of the ones that he's found in Campeche are enormous. No one really believed that cities of this size could still be out there unexplored. Of course, in many cases, the looters have found them, but that's a different story. Okay, so this site, which I visited in, I think we went there in '95. But all they had done at that point was they had looked at a couple of monuments and they had done a bit of mapping. It was, unfortunately, this was lying under the ground when we were there. And it was only a couple of years later that it was dug up. This is them discovering a very important altar, which, as I mentioned, this used to be called Soporte Bobal, and they changed it. It's now called Altar de los Reyes, because this is the altar of the kings. And what you can see, a little bit damaged, of course, we see emblem glyphs. Here is Palenque. Here is Tikal. This is the corner of Calakmul. Here is the water scroll, the one that we see at Altun Ha, and in other places in Belize. This has emblem glyphs all the way around it. There's another view. Motul de San Jose. This one, which is Etzna, David Stewart recognized this as Etzna. You find the same glyph in the very few really legible monuments we have at Etzna. And some, unfortunately, are just too damaged for us to quite see what they are. But it turns out that there are, Nikolai Gruber was working on this with Ivan, and he worked out that there were 13 emblem glyphs around this monument. And there's a little text on the top which talks about the 13 divisions. So it seems that there are two levels of understanding here. There's a kind of emblem glyph as a real, royal, political entity. But that doesn't mean to say that the Maya themselves weren't conceiving of this in somewhat grander fashion. And that's where it relates back to Copan Stela A. Because I don't think that Copan Stela A was ever intended to indicate that there were 4 gigantic states. But it nonetheless is talking about what Copan saw as, including itself, of course, the great states of their time, the great four division. And here, in a somewhat amended form, is the idea of the 13. Of course, 13, another one of these Maya magical numbers. So it's a shame we don't have all of them. It seems as if all the pieces don't really fit together, and some pieces have been taken away, etc., etc. But it does point to this sort of cosmic understanding. Okay, so
Does that also have a date?
it does not, no. There is a stela which has a date which is nearby, which I think is from something like 91510 or 91610, something like that. So this would be in the... I mean, stylistically, it's a little bit late. I would guess it's in the 750s, 760s, something like that. It seems to be a time probably when the Maya world was already under stress. It may already be kind of hearkening to a sort of ideal world, which is the cracks were beginning to show. But no, this doesn't have a date, so we don't know. Yeah, I didn't. I chose not to go into that too much, but it's very important to bring that up. Is that in the same way as the Korpan one has kind of been, we've gone away from the idea that it's to do with the division of space. At Sebal, we know again, thanks to David, his interpretation of the ilah, the verb to see. What's happening is the Sebal king is doing a period ending, and the kings of Tikal, Calakmul, and Matul San Jose are witnessing it. So it doesn't have a big political agenda in the sense that Bartol took it. Okay, so now let's move to the problems posed by the Snake Kingdom. Because, of course, for many, many years, there was Bartol calling it Chan. It later on became Site Q. Peter Matthews dubbed it as that. I think many of you will know the whole issue towards La Corona, finding all the looted monuments, the Site Q monuments, covered in snake emblem glyphs. But actually tracking it down to one place proved to be rather difficult. As I mentioned, Joyce Marcus made I would call it an inspired guess. We had this fantastically important emblem, and we had a fantastically big site. So it made sense that they go together. Calakmul, again, as we'll see just in a minute, we'll see the reasons why that was so difficult. But anyway, this is spelling, here's the Kohul, here is Khan. It's not Chan. Chan would be the proper sort of Cholan form. Khan is either archaic or Yucatec. It's a debatable point. But this is the Ka phonetic prefix. This is the thing that tells us that we must always read this as Khan and not Chan. And Howl, of course. So this is a little potted history about the snake emblem glyph and how he came to find out these things. So I mentioned 1958, Heinrich Berlin first notices it. Doesn't know where it is. 1968, Thomas Bartol, he identifies the snake emblem as one of these 4 regional capitals. He also didn't know where it was. Joyce Marcus suggested that the snake emblem glyph belongs at Calakmul, and she also suggested that at Sebal, that the wind site, what we now call Matul San Jose, which was unknown to Bartol, actually belongs to Matul San Jose. So she was right about that as well. 1974, Jeff Miller published an article in the Mesa Redonda volume which talked about the first Calakmul or snakehead king. He called him Jaguar Paw Smoke. We can now read that name as Yuknom Yichak. Yuknom is still a little bit of a debatable translation, but Yichak is the claw of fire. And we'll see his glyph in a minute, and it's a fiery claw. 1979, Peter Matthews produced the first evidence for a snake king at Calakmul, because he found the birth date of Yichak on the side of Calakmul Stela 9. This actually, by the time that Peter was doing this no longer existed. but in the Carnegie photographs, the side which is now basically destroyed shows that long count date. Peter, on the other hand, was not an enthusiast for Calakmul being the capital of the snake polity, ironically enough. But in fact, he'd found the first real evidence that it was. 1994, David Stewart, Stephen Houston identify toponyms. One of the most important papers in Maya epigraphy, Dumbarton Oaks volume, published in 1994, released in the Samizdat copies in about 1989. And let's look at those. So here's the Emblem Glyph, Howl, Khan, Howl. And then these were the two places that they identified with Calakmul. Ush or Hush Tetun, which means the three stones, and what they called Nab Tunich, but from finds that we made at Calakmul, it's possible to reorder that particular interpretation. It must be Shiknab. So both of these places are associated with Calakmul kings. For example, Yichak comes the power, he exceeds at Chiknab. At Calakmul itself, when the end, the 9-15-000 period ending, it happens at Oshtetun. So there's multiple references, and we'll see some of them now. So here is the map. This is John Bowles' amazing map of central Calakmul, produced in only about, I think, 7 or 8 days, something like that. In the midst of jungle. I mean, this is in deep forest. And just with the most, this is 1932. None of your GPS, none of your, optical instruments. This is just tape measure stuff. Compass, tape measure, protractor. It's the most basic form of mapping. And until very, very recently, this is still the best map. It's actually far superior to the map produced in the 1980s. Anyway, 2 gigantic pyramids. This is, of course, the 2 mounds of which give Calakmul its name. The 2 adjacent mounds. It's those 2. These huge palace groups, large central plaza, and we'll be talking about a few of these different areas. But I just want to give you some sense of its scale. Biggest classic Maya site. And what happened is that the site was discovered by Cyrus Lundell in 1931. He was working on exploring for the benefit of fruit companies and chicle working. And so he went with chicle tappers into the forest in Campeche. He was also very interested in botany. He actually wrote works on botany. And Lundell discovered, at least from a scientific point of view, discovered Calakmul. Morley was told about how many monuments there were, and he immediately whipped up an expedition which went there in 1933. This is one of the photographs taken by Morley's wife, and it shows the base of, go back, it's these monuments here in front of structure 1. And you're seeing 54, 53, and 51, which they turned over, and of course we're in this fine state of preservation. These don't exist at the site anymore, because in the 1960s they were looted. And I may even have a picture very kindly lent to me, or given to me by Virginia Miller. She went there in 1976. The looting was probably in the mid to late 60s. You can see the dress style indicates a 1976 temple location. And this is the remains of steles 51 and 52. 51 was the one in the far back in the previous picture, which is now in the National Museum in Mexico. So that if you want to go to the Maya Sala, you'll find that. You'll have to go to Hungary to see stele 53. 52, which is for some reason lying down here outside, is also in Mexico. It's actually in another museum. 54, unfortunately, was almost completely destroyed. I don't really yet know the full story about this, but the top half of it is now in Campeche, but all of this stuff is now gone. Okay, this is stele 89. So this is from the top of structure 1. And we're going to see the front of it a little bit later on, because the front of it is in Cologne, Germany. And they've erected this, Ina has re-erected this, I think, as a kind of, as a monument to destruction. And notice in particular these cut marks, because we're going to see those again a bit later. Okay, so those are the nice monuments, and they were all stolen. So this is what epigraphers have to work with at Calakmul. It's a totally different kind of stone. It's debatable as to whether those nice monuments actually were imported stone or whether they were just a particularly good patch of stone. It's hard to tell. But most stone at Calakmul has to be a lot thicker because it's so easily broken that they're much more monumental. And this has a text, or it used to. It has a portrait, or it used to. And this is pretty typical. And of these kind of things, we have them in abundance. We have something like 118 stela at Calakmul. And thanks to my colleagues, I've been working there since, they've been working since 1993. I started working in 1994. And they have been steadily clearing, consolidating, investigating the site. Inside here, don't have pictures of it, but is an amazing pre-classic stucco facade, which is just amazingly jaw-dropping. And one day will be open to the public. But these are pre-classic buildings with early classic and late classic additions. This is one of these masks. This is the armature for a stucco mask in sort of kind of pre-classic kind of resurrections of style. It's not really a classic thing, but they're sort of imitating it. And this is from one of these early years, probably this is from the late 90s, working on one of these big palace groups, of which now quite a good part is rebuilt. And this is from much more recent. This is a 3-story palace construction, a bit like those of you who've been to Tikal and seen those sort of central acropolis. Now, the important thing, of course, is that people are digging. And that's what we need, because if we're going to see inscriptions in their good state without all that terrible erosion, we're going to need to find things which have been buried. And when you do, you find things like that. Even tiny little sherds with these beautiful confirmations that the snakehead does indeed exist at Calakmul. This is the nicest one of all the, probably 8 or 10 that we found. It's a nicely preserved block. It's a ball player. He's got a big yoke here, steps of the ball court. There's his eye just there. Unfortunately, the name has been mostly destroyed. And not only do we have the emblem glyph at Calakmul, but we also have these toponyms. So here, this is I mean, it's either a fantastic opportunity or it's a terrible tragedy, whichever way you look at it. This block is a very hard limestone, and it's very, very shallowly carved. So the drawing really shows a lot more than is actually on the monument. It must be part of a very large hieroglyphic stairway, but this is the only block we've ever found. So there's lots of things at Calakmul still to discover. This is the whole long count up here. We're just finishing up here with glyph A, and then we have a couple of verbs for accession, and then before we get the name of the king, this is probably going into one of his titles, we have Oshtetun, toponym. This is another recent find. Not only have people been digging up into the Acropolis, they've also been digging down underneath. And in one of these chambers underground, there is a painted bench. And this, although most of what we've been looking at so far is late classic, this is early classic. So this is the text, some of the really nicest early classic calligraphy around. It talks about the dedication of his bench. His name is a little bit too damaged to be very certain about. It's an important title here. But the important thing is we get Oshtetun Kalomte. Kalomte is one of these big, big titles. this is one of the few things that's more important than a Howl, is a Kalomte. Kalomte is a kind of over-king, kind of emperor-type figure. And then, we'll see it in more detail. Yeah. So here's the 3 for the Osh, or the Hush, Te, and Tu. Complement down. We also get Chiknab Ahau. Ahau is done with the headband, and this is an enormously complicated spelling. Quite a weird one. But it shows that Chiknab is there, is mentioned in the early classic, and we also had Oshtetun mentioned in the early classic. This is a much more typical, conventional late classic form. Ach Chiknab, he of Chiknab. It's on the base of a plate. Okay. So I mentioned that these monuments are in really, 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 really bad shape. And it means that sometimes you can get only little details out of things, and sometimes you have to rely on old photographs. This is another picture taken in 1932, and it's steel 75, and it's possible to work out the chronology of this. The important thing is you've got a birth verb down here, which is quite visible, and it's attached to the remnants of a date, and that date can be calculated, even though it's not in very good shape. It turns out that it's the same date mentioned at El Peru on stele 20, and it's the birth date of Yuknom Chen. So this is someone who was, Joanne mentioned, as the great king of Calakmul, and this is indeed during his reign. So in the same way as Peter had found the birth date of Yichak Ak, we have the birth date of Yuknom Chen. This is the back of that monument, and this is the nicest portrait we'll get of that king. His name occurs again here on a codex-style vessel. It's a different spelling. It's with the Kolomte, again, to show what a high king he is. This comes from Tomb 4. And Tomb 4, excuse me when I take a little bit of a drink. Much better. Tomb 4 is quite fascinating. It also contained a jade mosaic mask, a bit like Pakal's mask. And it has a stucco lining to it. And that stucco lining had little pieces, which if you use tweezers, I mean, we're talking about something, these pieces are about, well, that piece is smaller than a fingernail, so you can get an idea. This is Yuknom and Chen. So this is actually the name of the great king was on that mask. And the introduction to it says that it's Ulbach. It's his image. It's the image of the king. So the mask represented Yuknom Chen. But the tomb is more complicated because it has this huge, well, big plate, which is quite beautiful, a bit damaged, but nonetheless rather beautiful. And around here, it has the name of Yuknom Yichak Ak. Oh, sorry, Yichak. So this is the jaguar claw. These are the flames coming out, claw of fire. So both what we presume is the father and the son are mentioned in the same tomb. There's a lot more to say about that, but it really is too long a story. The important thing is that we have the name of Yichak Ak at Calakmul. Okay, so let's look at things a little bit more chronologically and investigate this whole issue about the early classic and the late classic. Here I've arranged Calakmul monuments by their dedicatory date. It somewhat understates things because this is, 1, and then this is 2, so this is 2 from the same date, and then 3 from the same date. But the 3 plus is because many of these are up to 5 erected on the same date. No one else does this. So there's a huge preponderance here of the late classic, but you can see the early classic is almost nothing. Almost nothing. Basically just 2 monuments. That's interesting. The period, which I call the period of the 3 kings, Yuknom Chen, we talked about, Yuknom Yichak Ak, we've talked about. We haven't talked about this guy. He's the successor, Yuknom Tok Awil. But effectively, they cover about a century. And it's just this period here. So it's really when Calakmul is erecting tons and tons of monuments is the period of the three kings. It's a very short period, comparatively. Now, foreign references to the Snake Kingdom, they're also very heavily around the time of the three kings, but there's also a lot more of them in the early classic than we get at Calakmul. So there's a sort of bit of a disjunction here. You know, where are all those kings that we're hearing about over here? Now, when we look at early classic monuments, just these two, they're kind of interesting. This is Stela 43. It's the one that was known from the earliest explorations of the site. And it was found in an enclosed room. Now, I'm not sure that anyone's ever really published this, but most of the time when monuments are found inside rooms, they're believed to be reset, that they weren't originally there. They were out in the plazas originally, and they've been sort of heirloomed or turned into a museum or whatever. But in some way, they've been sectioned off out of view as a special place of veneration. It's probable, actually, that there was another one on the other side. This is on structure 2, this huge stairway. There was a heavily eroded monument on the other side. Now, the text on this is generally pretty nice. So we should find, in theory, all the information we want. The date is 9/4, so it's 514. But as ever, as all epigraphers know, the most important principle of epigraphy is the bit you're looking for is destroyed. So down here, where there would be final and confirmatory proof as to the emblem glyph, there's nothing there. But, and I'm only showing one side, the other side is almost completely preserved. But it mentions the name of somebody we've never heard of. At a time when we know who the king of the Snake Kingdom is. It's not this guy. So that's a kind of disjunction. What's that about? Now, when I arrived this would probably be March of 1994, this monument was under excavation. It's not found by the ENA project. This is found by Willie Folan of the University of Campeche project. A nice early monument, even earlier. It was inside a niche. It was something that at one point you could have visited with a sort of little corbelled kind of entranceway. But again, it's very much reset, and effectively it appears in the middle of those two monuments inside buildings. So this is set into the middle of the stairway. We'll come back to that in a minute. It's got a big text on the back. Okay. The thing that I did on day one at Calakmul was come to visit Stela 33 because my colleagues had said, well, you know, you're not going to find anything here. I mean, the monuments are all just terrible, you know, which I knew. But go and look at 33 because we've just re-erected it. So this is something that had fallen down. It's actually been photographed by Rupert Dennison, or Morley actually. But they'd re-erected it and it was much, much easier to look at. So with a little bit of calculation and work on this showed that Morley's whole chronology for this monument was, well, almost entirely wrong. He was right about the side texts, which position this as 9/11/500. So it's during the reign of Yuknom Chen. But the back text was actually all different. And instead of being in the late classic, it's set in the early classic. And it's the period endings 9710 and 98000. It also features the name of a king, it's the accession of the king. And this guy I knew because he had attacked Palenque in the year 611. And what it's telling us is that he came to power in 579. Completely new information, very exciting. There's stuff to do with his wives and ceremonies and stuff like that. And there's a distance number which is destroyed, mostly destroyed. But what it has down here is actually the appropriate parts to lead to the birth date of Yuknom Chen. So it's possible that what he's talking about is his rather aged father. It would give a rationale as to why he's talking about the early classic. But the important thing is its back reference. This is not a monument from Scroll Serpent. In this period, it's a Yuknom Chen monument looking back in time. Okay. That's just the same, this is his name on this 9-8 period ending. But that's not the only reference to it. There's another one on Stela 8. And this one is even more interesting. Here's the name, very badly damaged. It tells us that he's a 4 Katuna Howl, so he died when he was over 59 years old. But it tells us that it happened in the middle of this place. Now, occasionally they do tell us about events that take place within a site, but in a special location. But this, considering that this is recorded a good couple of hundred of years later, this is actually not quite, this is from, I think, 721. It's talking about the far past, and yet they're giving us this particular location. This looks like it's somewhere else. It doesn't look like they're talking about Calakmul. I told you I was going to show you this monument. This is the one in Cologne. So you remember those cut marks. That's where they come from. And I went especially to see it in the fabulously redone and reopened museum in Cologne, and it's not on display. So it's in storage, which I think is an even better reason why they should give it back to Mexico. Anyway, here is Yuknon Tok Awil, his emblem glyph, his Kolomte title, and then something interesting. He is the 3 Tzak Buli. He's the Ush Tzak Bul. And this means the third in line, the third in step. He's in the third in step of Kawil, and then a title to do with Oshtetun. Wow, Kawil. Who is Kawil? And why is he the third in succession to Kawil? There's another monument, also found by Folan, also very, very close to that, Stela 114. It's Stela 115. It's actually a door jamb. And the name of Yichak is very clear. And this looks very, very much like the same kind of compound, but probably here with the number 2 instead of the number 3. A wheel is again the subject, but they tell us that this person is the 5 Katuna Howl. Well, we know that Yuknom Chen was a 5 Katuna Howl. And we know that Yichak was his successor, and we know that Yuknom Tok Awil was the successor after that. So it looks as if they're simply counting to the time of Yuknom Chen, and they're calling him Awil. Awil can be used as a kind of ancestral name. At Tikal, you see this, that Awil appears as the ancestral father of Yashnun Ayin on one of his monuments. So I think that this is what they're calling Yuknom Chen after his death. And what they're effectively saying is that Yuknom Chen is the founder. That's surprising, because Calakmul is hundreds and hundreds of years old, and we know from the early classic that there were kings doing big stuff much, much earlier than this. Why is Yuknom Chen the founder? Okay, so this is just a little review of the early classic. Very few early classic monuments. None of them have a snake emblem. What early classic kings are mentioned are only retrospectively. And they have a dynastic count, which only goes back by a count of 3 to Yuknom Chen. You know, Tikal has a count of like 29. Very, very different. Okay, so there has to be a solution to this. And the solution is somewhat further to the north. The solution is up there at Dzibanche. These are the late classic mentions of Calakmul. This is the distribution. That's slightly out of date now. But anyway, it gives you an idea of this sort of central southern emphasis of the Snake Kingdom. In the early classic, it's different. There's an emphasis towards the north, the middle and the north. That should have lined up. Okay, Dzibanche, interesting site, very big site. Has multiple centers to it and has lots and lots of settlement. About, 6-7 kilometers away is Paul Bosch, and a little bit further away is El Resbalon. All of them have early classic snake emblem These are ones from Bresbalon, king we've never heard of. Here in very early classic style, a snake head. There's another one here. This is very interesting spelling with that vulture head. Potentially a king we know, but that's a little bit uncertain. Pol Bosch, a site not many people know about. A little bit small, but here are the emblem glyphs of the Snake Kingdom. But look, there are two people. This looks like a local Pol Bosch king interacting with a snakehead king. Oh, we didn't have time. Okay. But the sort of the daddy of all of this is Dzibanche, because in 1995 they found this hieroglyphic stairway. On the hieroglyphic stairway are multiple references to the snake emblem glyph and to the name of Yuknon Chen. But stylistically, this must be someone much, much earlier than the guy we know. This has a bound hand, they have the crazy hair, and they have the name of the captive as a belt element. And that name here is what we find here. It's a repeating pattern on all these blocks. This is a little kind of chronology. Here we kind of have a typical late classic form. We find it La Corona. This is how it is in the beginning of the late classic and then into the early classic. This cone form is like this. But when you get back to about 550, it's now much more fish-finny. Same at Yashchilan, and then even more so at Dzibanche. This L-shaped Howl is particularly early. So we don't actually, we have a couple of dates, but we can't pin them in the long count. But look at this. Washaktun Stila 19 is the only other place I've ever seen the same crazy hair. Also, probably the captive's name on a belt, because that's typical of some other Washaktun monuments. Now this is very early, 357. I don't think that the Dzibanche steps are that early, but they're almost certainly earlier than anything we've ever seen in terms of where snake emblem glyphs appear. Dzibanche is an interesting site. It's a nice big site. It's not the biggest site you've ever seen, but a lot of it, including all of the pyramids, are early classic. So if you want to compare Dzibanche to Tikal, you have to take away everything that's late classic at Tikal. You have to take away the final forms of everything in North Acropolis. You have to take away Temple 1, Temple 2, Temple 5, Temple 4, Temple 3. You'd be left with Mundo Perdido. But everything would be stripped back. And if you did that, then Dzibanche would be at least as impressive as Tikal. This particular structure, you would have the Eastern Acropolis. And probably the Southern Acropolis too. Probably. Dzibanche is still better. This building was a kind of an necropolis because these tunnel-looking things are actually tombs. And they're very, very rich. They're full of jade. They have jade masks. They're all early classic. And one of them, this one down here, has the name of a snake king with an emblem glyph. Since then, various other hints have appeared, some of which are not published and I can't talk about. But the evidence is increasingly overwhelming that Dzibanche is the capital of the Snake Kingdom in the early classic. This is Yokup, which is not a small site, but it's up there. It's closer to Kobat than it is to Dzibanche, and this gives us the name of a guy called Sky Witness. So again, all this northern orientation in the early classic. I said I would talk about Cielo 114. That's the front. This is the back. Not an easy text to read. It's actually sort of well preserved, but there's always sort of bits chipped off just where you don't want them. But anyway, this is the area which you can work on and have worked on quite a bit. And this one particular glyph. This is how epigraphers work, taking multiple photographs with multiple lighting angles and finding little details which make sense from one angle but you can't maybe see in another angle. This would be the composite drawing. We've got Howl, we've got a Howl, and we've got the main sign, but the main sign is not a snake. It's got the big leaf nose bat. This would be more like looking at Kopat than looking at Calakmul. And here's the sort of rendering of it. This is the name of the king. As often the case in the early classic, the emblem glyph actually introduces the name. So it's a bat emblem. Also, it has Chik Nab Howl on the same monument. So this really is a Calakmul monument because Chik Nab is that local place. Now, jump forward, 751. This is after the time of the three great kings. Three kings period ends 736. This is 751. Down here we have the king's name and another bat head. It's very clearly a bat head because his name includes a snake, and you can see these are totally, totally different. So the bats are back by 750. This doesn't look very clear. I'm going to show the drawing. This is the laha. This is the new laha. This is the new sculpted outcrop at Calakmul. And it contains three supernaturals, Chak here, Kinichachao here, some sort of Jade here, with text scattered over it. This is 3 meters by 2 meters. And this looks very much like a king's name. And these are emblem glyphs, 2 of them. But unfortunately, as much as I've tried, I can't tell you what either of those main signs are. If I had to put money on it, and of course, as an archaeologist, we're just full of money. That's supposed to be a joke. I would love to think that this is a bat and that this is a snake, and that the 2 emblem glyphs are combined here. We don't have a date for this monument, but it probably is in that 750 kind of period, I would think. Okay. What's going on? Now, from the time of Berlin, we've associated emblems with sites, like their place names. But we've seen that it has to be more complicated than that, because the emblem glyph of Tikal turns up at Dos Pilas. There's a breakaway family. There's a son of the king. He sets up a kingdom at Dos Pilas. He's in league with Calakmul. There's tons of history. It's very complicated. But the emblem glyph is shared by both places. This is not 100% attached to Tikal. We also know that before Yaxchilan was using the split sky, it was at El Zotz. And there are 2 emblems at Yaxchilan. This is the more typical one, but the other one also turns up at El Zotz, and when they give you a dynastic count, they give you different numbers for each emblem, suggesting that one of them is placed further back in time and probably comes from El Zotz. Palenque wasn't originally at Palenque. We'll see this in a minute. It was at a place called Tactan. So that was already a change. And then a similar kind of thing happens when Tortuguero conquers Comilcalco, because that family seems to move to Comilcalco. In the early classic, it looked like the area around Calakmul, and not just Calakmul, other sites, Ushul, Na'ashtun, Oshpemul, are using the bat emblem glyph, and the snakes are further north. They change. It switches. And in 2005, based on all the evidence I've been talking about, I suggested that sometime either Yuknom Chen or his immediate predecessor switched the site, the capital of the site from one to the other. Colleague of mine, Alex Tokovanin, came up with a very interesting interpretation of Naranjo hieroglyphic stairway text. This is 631, and this is the very period when this transition might have occurred. We've got the conquest of Naranjo. This is the king who is defeated. This is his title. It's done by the predecessor to Yuknok Chen, is the emblem. And it's said down here, this is the important bit, Ta Oshtetun, Ach Chiknab. Ta is a preposition, at Oshtetun. Well, he can't be attacking Naranjo at Calakmul. That's impossible. And it would flummox me. I didn't know what this was doing. But Alex responded to my suggestion, and he came up with a very good idea, that what they're talking about is the snake kings at Oshtetun. They want to specify they're not talking about the ones from Dzibanche. It also, of course, says Ach Chiknab, so he of Chiknab. So this might mean that he comes from Calakmul. On the other hand, he may just simply now be habituated and resident. Okay. Most of you perhaps, or at least some of you, will have seen this because this created a hoo-ha last year when it was found at La Corona. This is the panel which talks about 2012. And in that sense, it was really ironic because here was a monument of which the 2012 reference is just down there. It was it's on the BBC, it's on CNN, it's World Daily Report, whatever. And the only thing that people want to talk about is 2012. But you could guarantee that within 8 months, no one was ever really going to be very much interested in this again, because the interesting thing was up here, the thing that no one was paying any attention to. It's David Stewart's drawing. And this area here, because this is what I call Christmas and birthday combined. This is a verb we know refers to the establishment of things, foundation events. And what's being found is the snake. It's being found. Yeah. And it's given a very explicit date. It's in 635. They're establishing the snake kingdom. So I think David, of course, leapt to this conclusion as soon as he saw it. This is exactly when they moved from Dzibanche. We see, just to add some confirmation of this is talking about Palenque and their move from Toktan. This is a panel from Temple 17. This area down here is the same verb, and Lakamha, which is Palenque we know today, and the king who did it. So this is the establishment of Lakamha. Basically the same phrase. Okay, so, how much time do we have? 10 minutes. Well, this is the issue. I think that what's happening is the ruling dynasty, the royal family, has transitioned in some way. Now, because we don't have a lot of detail about what's happening at Dzibanche, it's very hard to know whether the same people have got up and left Dzibanche, or whether in some way Calakmul has inherited a title. I mean, these are the levels of complexity which we need a lot more data to really be able to answer. I mean, to some extent, we can only talk about the kind of big picture. We have to keep working on trying to work out what's really behind this. And I'll give you a suggestion about that in a minute. I showed this earlier. This is one of these dynastic vases from. We found fragments of this at Calakmul. Yeah, we have the only archaeologically excavated sherds of these vessels come from Calakmul. Okay, well that'll do. 19 kings of Calakmul. So you can see what is ridiculous that Yuknop Chen could be just the third ruler, because there are 19 here. And familiar names, Yichak Ak. The problem is that they're all out of sequence. There's lots of names. There's Yuknom Chen here. There's Tahom Mukab Ak. People we know, but they're all in the wrong order. So this must be, and all their dates of accession are all wrong. So these must be earlier. This must be an early dynasty. They must go back and back and back in time. It's possible that Scroll Serpent is the one we know, but even then it doesn't really work. So I think this is probably not just early classic, this is probably a pre-classic dynasty of the Khan polities. Well, if you use a base figure for generations of Maya kings, which you get from Palenque and Copan, which are both between 21.5 and 22, which is the same as, that's in 400 years of history. And it's the same in the British royal family, 881 years. Average mean length of reign is 21.7 or something like that. So if you use that, you end up with about 400 years of history here as a guide. About 400 years. Okay. So Dzibanche is early classic, but that's not going to be good enough to take up another 400 years of history. However, just a few kilometers away is Ichkabal Each cabal is one of these, another one of these great new secrets. Because each cabal is huge. This is the Google map, and what you can see, this is the reservoir. These actually are excavations on the tops of two mounds, and here is one platform mound on a much bigger platform. I'm going to show you a map in a second. So that is the map of just central each cabal, with 100 meters. These pyramids are the same size as the ones at Mirador. That's how big they are. It's a lot more condensed than Mirador. Mirador is a lot more spread out. So as a total city size, each cabal is not on Mirador's scale. But in terms of investment in construction, it is. And this is a major, major site which was not found until 1997. There's another little view here, just to show a bit more of the topography and newspaper reconstruction. So, how much time do I have? I have about 7 minutes. Each cabal could be the precursor to Dzibanche. It could be the early Snake Kingdom home. That's basically the takeaway point from that.
There was some talk, I don't know, in the last couple of years that El Mirador might have been also a precursor to Dzibanche. Do you have any views on that?
I think I'm at least partly, if not mostly, responsible for that. Because I did have a throwaway sentence in the book, the Justin Kerr book, about suggesting that as a possibility. I think that each cabal is a much better candidate. And although there is presented evidence for El Mirador, I don't think any of it is persuasive. Okay, so this is a quick tour through. Joanne showed one of these maps earlier. This is the original one that I did in 2000. In 2008, the only differences you're going to see around here, I made an update because we have improved our knowledge of what's happening in the extreme west. And now this is the new one, which adds Ushul, La Corona, Soporte Borbal, El Reynado, Holmul, and El Palmar. Very, very interesting series of connections. Again, of course, we still have this huge preponderance of Calakmul stroke Dzibanche. But let's divide them up. Now we're looking at Calakmul as the late classic and Dzibanche as the early classic. When it comes to relationships with the West, look, they're mostly actually quite positive, whereas Dzibanches are violent. And it's just a hint that by moving to Calakmul, Dzibanche may have, or the Snake Kingdom may have opened up access towards the West. That's the hypothesis that I'm working to. It was strategically advantageous to be in a more central location. Okay, so to conclude, what do we now know about this kind of place? I'm just going to very quickly skip through these. I don't think that we're talking, even though the center of the Calakmul kingdom is very, very well integrated, I don't think we're talking about a regional state. This would be the Flannery view. This, of course, would be the Adams view we showed earlier, and as contrasted with the Pierre polities. I think that it's much closer to a very, very powerful hegemonic center. It has rivals that it never fully controls, Tikal, Palenque. And everyone else just sort of fits in. They're just a little bit Calakmul or a little bit Tikal, or they switch between the two. But the closer you get to Calakmul, it's like a black hole. Science stops working properly. Physics stops working properly. You don't have the same titles as you have elsewhere. You don't have the same degree of influence because you're closer to this sort of the pull of Calakmul. So, in conclusion, this is a photograph from my colleague and friend Kenichiro, taken at El Palmar, an amazing monument, sort of National Geographic Online. And here we have this very broken, and this is my great visual metaphor of trying to piece together the broken fragments of Calakmul history. We are a lot closer, as my colleagues, which I'd like to thank, we are a lot closer to understanding the snakehead kingdom and all its problems, but we still have some way to go. I will conclude at this point, and we might have time for maybe one or two questions. So for that, I'll thank you very much for your attention.